All right, let's talk about Bioshock 4 and the rumors and speculation around Bioshock 4, as well as some things we do know. All right, so here are the things we do know. We do know that Ken Levine has nothing to do with this project. It's hard to say if that will be a good or a bad thing. If they have most of the team that worked on the other Bioshock games, they should be okay. I'm hoping that they have like difficulty options. I know that Ken Levine was the one who specifically pushed for 1999 mode and probably also 1998 mode for the Burial at Sea Part 2 DLC. So we know that it's in development. We don't have a release date. We don't know the setting. We don't know who you play as. We don't know what it even looks like. So most of what we are going by is speculation. And the main thing people are going by are like hiring, like job listings, so like what they're hiring for. And that does kind of inform you as to what will be in the game, because obviously if they're hiring someone for like dialogue trees and voice acting and like interaction between the player and NPCs in a meaningful way, then obviously that's probably going to be in the game. Same thing for the open world thing, so very likely we'll have dialogue in open worlds. So let's kind of go over really quickly what each of the three Bioshock games has in it and how it kind of relates to this new format, assuming that we're going to be getting like a kind of Mass Effect styled game where you have like dialogue and like it's like a sandbox. So all right, Bioshock 1 is basically a sandbox. You can backtrack completely, so even though the game is technically linear and you go through the levels, at any point in time, using the bathyspheres, you can go back to any of the levels. If you missed an item, you can get it, or if you missed like a tonic or something, you can pick it up, or you can kill any big daddies and harvest or save any little sisters that you haven't dealt with by backtracking. So the first game already is a sandbox, so I'm not too worried that they're going to make it a sandbox, because Bioshock 1 already literally is. It's just a very small sandbox. The issue with making a sandbox large is that it's hard to populate it with interesting and compelling content. If you've ever played like Skyrim or Fallout 4 or Oblivion or Morrowind, while the land masses are huge, you kind of have to scrounge for content, right? Like you have to look for the content or figure out where it's at, like the interesting quests and everything, and then actually go to those locations and then actually activate the content and then do it. The thing with a semi-linear game like Bioshock 1, where it is a sandbox but it is linear, is that you can control the player's experience. You can adjust difficulty curve pretty easily, so like you can increase enemy health and enemy plasmids and enemy abilities and all these other things. So it's much easier to control the game. With a sandbox, it's a lot harder. You can do like automated scaling. So like let's say you're like, if there's leveling, for example, if you're like level 10 or something, enemies will be harder. Or as you are at a certain point in the plot, maybe enemies just get harder, assuming you have certain upgrades. Bioshock 1 already is open world, basically. It's just a very small underwater city that it takes place in, because there's not like the actual land mass for the game is quite small. This coming from someone who's beaten it a few times, so it's actually a very tiny game, especially compared to like Skyrim or something where the landmass is huge. So Bioshock 2 is a completely linear game with exploration, and Bioshock Infinite is a linear game with exploration. There are points of no return in both Infinite and 2, but not necessarily in Bioshock 1. So making Bioshock open world could work, and it could work in an interesting way. So if you've ever played The Legend of Zelda, which I'm sure most people have, in Zelda it's very common for there to be like, a heavy boulder that you need some bracelet to lift up a rock or whatever in order to get some like item. So if you had an open world Bioshock, let's say you get like incinerate halfway through the game, there would be things like perma-ice, permafrost somewhere that you could burn or melt to get items, and there could be like interesting backtracking. So if they do this right, it could be like Metroid, it could be like Zelda, where as you go through the game, there are parts of it that are locked off to you that become unlocked as you get plasmids and abilities, and that could be interesting, and that could be, very much in line with like a Metroid Zelda game. And I'm a fan of both of those. Like I do like Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2. I played a little bit of Prime 3 and I liked it, but Zelda's a good game as well. Like it's pretty solid. So if they're going towards that route, it could work. I could see an open world Bioshock game being interesting as long as they have like interesting events that you stumble upon and interesting quests. The main problem with most quests in open world games is they tend to be very generic, like go here and kill 10 boars or whatever. So I'm sure they could make it a little bit more interesting, and that's what the hope is. Obviously, this sounds like it's going to be an ambitious game, so let's hope they don't make it too ambitious, because the more ambitious something becomes, the more unstable it is generally. That's why you get things like the Cyberpunk 2077 fiasco, we'll call it. So yeah, hopefully they kind of reel it in and it's not like too crazy, but an open world Bioshock game could be fun. It could be good. I could see it working. If they section areas off and make it so that like each area is like contained, like in the case of Infinite, right now I'm in like the Think like courtyard and I can like travel to different areas. They could do that. I could still be kind of open world and like sectioned off. That way you can control experience better and the item placement's more interesting and they have more control. But if they do want it completely open world, they'll have to like put up good invisible walls, maybe like some mountains, things like that. Depends on the city, the setting. I think it might be in a city of some kind. We'll have to see, like an actual like urban setting, but that's not like revealed yet. All right, so let's talk about the dialogue. Dialogue can be good too. I'm not really worried that there's going to be dialogue in the game. Currently, there kind of is. Like, Booker talks. Jack and Alpha Series don't talk, but Booker actually talks. So, if you just had options to say different things to affect the story, that would be incorporating dialogue and decisions, and that could be decent. So, I'm not really worried about that. The open world thing, I'm not really worried about either. I'm sure they're going to hire some talent. A lot of people have been laid off because of COVID. Businesses, especially creative businesses, haven't been doing that well. So very likely there's a lot of qualified people that are really good at designing open world games looking for work. So hopefully, they get picked up and work on Bioshock 4. So as long as they handle it better than Bethesda does. Bethesda's kind of fallen off with their open worlds. I feel like Morrowind was the strongest open world game out of all of the Elder Scrolls, because it had interesting placed items it had really hidden secrets, and it had a good variety of items, and it handled loot well. Whereas like Oblivion, loot was always scaled, and there was all this like scaling, and like even if you found a cool area, it was like level scaled to be like iron armor or something. And then Skyrim, after the fact, did like a similar thing. I believe some of the loot in Skyrim is leveled, but I think Skyrim has the worst artifacts, and Morrowind has definitely the best artifacts. So if they want inspiration, I would highly recommend that they check out Morrowind and look at how it handles items and look at some of the secret items in the game. Now, obviously, Morrowind can feel empty at times because it's like one of the first open world games. Empty insofar as like content and as you're just like talking to people via text. But I think Morrowind handled items the best out of all the Elder Scrolls games. I distinctly remember being like level 5 and like stumbling upon a really high level cave, and there's just like a Daedric spear and a Daedric dagger impaling a skeleton against a rock, and I'm just like, holy shit. And then I got a Daedric spear really early in the game, and I was like super hyped about that, and I died like 10 times getting there to get those items. So I was like level 5, and there's pretty high level enemies. But Morrowind has a lot of interesting secrets. So if they made the game like that, where there's a lot of interesting secrets, a lot of like compelling backtracking, where you actually experience different things in the area when you backtrack to like unfreeze a blocked off thing or whatever, or break some cracked rock with some plasmid or something, that could be pretty interesting. Aside from all of those things, Ken Levine did work on Thief, System Shock 2, Bioshock 1, and Infinite, but not Bioshock 2. He did push for the 1999 mode, so hopefully we do still get difficulty options, because if the game is too easy, like, people need to understand, like, I know a lot of people aren't, like, super good at games, and that's fine. You don't have to be. It's, it's a time sink to become good at games. But for most of the gaming community, well, not most, maybe like a big chunk of it, maybe at least like 30 or 40% of it, like Dark Souls is a popular game, and all the Souls-like games are popular, so people like hard games. So if they just don't have an option to make the game hard, a lot of people are going to lose interest. If the game looks hard, it looks compelling, and it has interesting gameplay, people will play it and people will buy it. Now, obviously, because it's a Bioshock game, it should do well just because of the name and the brand recognition. But I'm hoping that it has like difficulty options and has like actual hard settings, and the the open world actually works. So that's what I'm hoping for. But aside from that, all we know is that Ken Levine's not working on it. It's in development. They've hired for open world. They've hired for like writers for dialogue. There might be some other details that I'm missing, but that's like the gist of it. I think an open world Bioshock game could work. It would require a lot of care. Open world is probably the hardest thing, second hardest, the hardest being MMO, to make successfully, because it's really easy to have a big empty world with nothing interesting in it. It's very hard to have difficult and compelling content that's interesting and engaging and keeps people invested in playing the game. The main thing that keeps me playing like Skyrim and Fallout is the mods. It has little to do with the actual base game. So I mean, if they open the game up for mods, that could also breathe some new life into it. Maybe let modders mess with your game a bit as an optional thing, so that if players want, they can have some interesting mods, maybe some gameplay mods. But that's all I can really say about Bioshock 4. It seems like they're pushing for something new, so let's just hope that they succeed, because obviously we all want a really good fourth Bioshock game, especially one with a nice set of difficulty options.
Watch where you're pointing, Matt.
But yeah, that's it for this video. I figured I'd just kind of go over what we know versus oops, I'll tab there for a second. I figured I'd go over what we know versus what's speculation. So we don't really know what it's going to look like, where it's going to be, how they're going to handle the open world. But basically an open world is just a sandbox, and there's already been a sandbox Bioshock game. That's Bioshock 1. I generally consider Bioshock 1 to be the strongest overall game for like story and everything, but for gameplay I have to give it to Infinite just because it has difficulty options. Survivor difficulty isn't even nearly as hard as 1999 mode. But there are some pretty broken abilities, like Shock Jockey, for example. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you in another video.